of the predictable things in a way that happens in a school that's had a history of 159 years is that very good students who love it here in their undergraduate careers get their degrees, and then they go away and get their graduate degrees, and then work a while in whatever their fields are. And before you know it, they have found their way back to Mars Hill and are on the faculty. And that has happened to Dr. Scott Pearson. You were graduated in 1984, and exactly 10 years later you were back here on the faculty. In the meantime, though, now you had gotten, in 1987, you had gotten your master's at Georgia, and you had also gotten your doctorate in 1991. How did it feel to come back in 94? What was it like to come back where you had been?
It was exciting and bizarre in the same vein. So in 1991 to 94, I was working at Oak Ridge National Lab and having a very good experience there. Some changes occurred in that institution, and a number of the colleagues that I went there to work with were beginning to think about leaving, and so in 94 I started looking around for opportunities. And there happened to be an opening here. Actually, one of my mentors, Don McCloud, because of health problems, retired. And to shorten the story, I came back to work here and thinking that, well, I'll go there. I think I could fit in there. I'm very interested in teaching. I'd like to see what that's like. And after 22 years, I'm waiting to see whether it's going to work out.
You know it's not. You know you're going to finish your career here. You were lucky. I have often thought that I felt that when you were here as a student in the early 80s, you were here at probably what most people would say was the great epoch for the biology department. It had a faculty that was incredible. They were well known. They did all kinds of things. You had Quick, and you had Dr. Hutt. You had Joanne Kroom, Sam Boggess. Who else? Name them. Alan
Well,
Smith.
Don McCloud and Alan.
And
Sam Boggess was not here at the time.
At that time. He came later, didn't he?
Yes.
Well,
it was a good place because there were well-qualified people that spanned a range of the disciplines within biology. They were all passionate about their particular corner of the field. They cared deeply about students and the success of students. I would say that was an important part of my experience, but in addition, I also had some great classmates. That was a period of time in which in retrospect, I think of that I had the good fortune of coming in when there was a very strong class and academically strong group of students that nurtured and challenged me, and we had a good sense of camaraderie. So it's those students, but also that this is a place in which those kinds of communities can grow organically, so to speak.
You're the first person, I believe, in all these interviews who's ever talked about the influence of your classmates. Most people talk about the good faculty and the circumstances around which they work, but you were saying that you had a great group of contemporaries who inspired you and encouraged you to do well.
Right.
You also worked with Dr. Uten, didn't you?
I was here, I overlapped him about 2 years. In my freshman year and sophomore year when he was living in the building.
Right.
And it was a time in which his Parkinson's disease was he was demonstrating those symptoms, particularly toward the end of my freshman year. And I do recall that in my sophomore year that I was rooming with one of the other biology majors, and we would take Dr. Uten just down the street to the grocery store and to pick up some various personal items. Right. He could not drive at that time. So
he was legendary, you know, for many years, and probably was the most distinguished from the standpoint of having written articles and traveled, played. He actually traveled more than he wrote, I think, didn't he? Let's talk a little bit about terms. I want to be sure. Most people, when they think of biology, think of somebody in a lab. But indeed, that's not what you do. We don't find you in a lab somewhere. Mostly you're out in the environment. For our purposes, to help all the lay people who might watch this interview at some point, you are now the Dean of the Division of Mathematics and Natural Sciences. Now, the natural sciences are?
It includes the programs in biology and chemistry.
Only? What about physics?
Physics physics is a field that crosses the boundary between the so-called natural sciences and mathematics.
Okay.
So our physics courses here have been taught over the years by often a person in mathematics. Currently, physics is taught by a chemistry faculty member.
Okay. So you actually do have the physics courses, but then you don't think of them so much as part of the sciences as you think of chemistry and biology.
Well, my point of view is I blur the line between mathematics and the so-called sciences, because quantitative measurement, analysis, thinking is essential to the sciences, and of course we often depend upon the mathematicians to teach us those tools, but they go together quite well. And matter of fact, a lot of my work, both in teaching and research, leans very heavily on the mathematics. And one of my colleagues in chemistry, actually seeking a label for me, called me a statistician, and I replied, well, I've been called worse in my time.
But you've also done computer programming in your time.
And that's again part of the quantitative.
Right. So they all fit and work comfortably together.
Right.
How many people, in proportion to give an idea, how many people, for example, are there in the Division of Natural Sciences and Mathematics at the moment, as far as majors and faculty? What would be your guess?
You mean students or faculty?
Both.
Okay. So faculty, I'm going to ask you to maybe edit right here, because I'm going to have to count to make sure I have it correct. But 3 chemists and 6 biologists, not including some part-time or temporary folks that are working with us right now.
Okay.
And then within mathematics, there are approximately 7 faculty there, and 2 more faculty in computer science.
So you really are looking over a rather large contingent of the campus, both in faculty members and in majors. How many majors would you say fit within that category of all that within your division?
There are 4 majors.
No,
5 majors
Five
that
majors.
fit within that division.
And then how many students in those majors?
There are approximately roughly 200 to 220 students that are majoring within those majors within the division.
Great.
Yeah.
That's a considerable number of the
Right.
proportion of the campus. Would that make you second after business in numbers?
Roughly, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you combine biology, chemistry, and zoology, those majors would be collectively, right behind or right with the business majors.
Okay. Now you got your undergraduate degree here in botany and zoology, and you also got your master's and your doctorate in zoology. Explain for us the difference between, let's get those things right. Biology, zoology, botany, ecology. Tell us the difference in those.
Well, biology is the broadest category. It, in a technical sense, includes the study, any study of a living thing falls under the category of biology.
So that's the generic term.
Yes,
Okay.
it's the big umbrella, the big tent, so to speak. Botany focuses primarily on the biology of plants, zoology on the biology of animals. But when I say that, there are, for example, zoologists who study diseases of animals, who study the genetics of animals, who study the cells within animals, and all the way up to a wildlife biologist who studies animals living out on the landscape. And similarly with the botanist, it's a substitute plant instead of animal.
Right, and so those people really could become what could be also labeled as microbiologists, because they're going into lab and doing cell work and that sort of research on that level too.
Well, it's many of these labels which occur within these disciplines they're quite fuzzy. There aren't clear dividing lines between them. There
it's
could
good
be.
if there isn't, don't you?
Yes, well, I think it's just a reflection of the complex relationships among living things.
Right.
Ecology is a little bit easier to define because it's the study of the relationship between organisms and their environment. And of course that environment includes living things such as other plants and animals and diseases, as well as the physical features of the environment such as the amount of moisture, the level of temperature, and chemicals in the environment.
Right. I know that your focus has been landscape ecology and also conservation biology.
Mm-hmm.
Now explain the difference in those two terms for us.
Again, there's quite a bit of overlap between them. And sometimes I'll use the term landscape ecology because that's the field that my doctoral dissertation was drawing on that field. It's a discipline which asks questions about spatial pattern. That is, if you fly over the earth and look out of the window of an airplane, we see that the landscape is a mosaic. It's a patchwork quilt of forest and fields and wetlands and dry areas, that there's that spatial pattern which exists in the world. And landscape ecologists want to know what are the causes of those spatial patterns, and also what are the consequences of it. And much of my research over the past year, the past 15 years, has asked the question, when human beings change that pattern of forest and fields, of wild areas versus residential areas, how do the native plants and animals respond to those changes?
And your master's thesis and your doctoral dissertation dealt with birds.
Yes.
How did you become interested in the whole realm of birds for your work? How did that happen?
It came, I think there's multiple influences. One is that Alan Smith, one of our former faculty members here and one of my mentors as a undergraduate, was interested in birds. I myself had grown up in the outdoors and spent a lot of time just hiking around. Birds have attracted the attention of quite a few biologists because they are fairly easy to see in the environment. There are many species that make a living in a lot of different ways. And from a conservation standpoint, a number of those species are sensitive. If we change their habitat, they're likely to respond to that in one way or another. So they're, in many ways, birds are a very intriguing group of animals to study. They're relatively accessible. One can find plenty of bird species just about anywhere in the world. So there's a convenience to them. There's also an attraction from a scientific point of view, being lots of different species. They're generalists or specialists, and they do interesting things.
Oh, they do. You're right. All of us, even though we're not scientists, watch interesting things.
Right.
We're bird watchers in our own way.
Yeah, and it helps. It also helps that there are many members of the general public who are interested in birds, just like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So if there is some conservation or ecological issue that comes up and it affects birds, automatically that's going to attract attention.
Yeah.
I've also worked with ants.
Yeah,
And
people, you just got through doing an ant project. Yeah. Tell me about that one.
Well, the ants are almost as intriguing, and worldwide there are many more kinds of ants, and frankly, they're much more important to the environment of the earth than birds are. But people just don't get quite as excited about ants. They get excited when there are ants in their house and they want to get rid of them.
Right.
But out, the ants do some very useful things for us in the landscape around us. For example, in the forest, if one goes into the forest and looks at the spring wildflowers, such as the trillium and the bellworts and the bloodroot, it turns out that the seeds of most of those species are moved around or dispersed by ants. The ants pick those seeds up and carry them to different places, carry them down into their nest, and in effect, they're planting them. So 40 to 60% of the wildflower species in our eastern temperate forest have some kind of mutualistic relationship with ants.
So we need to respect ants more, don't we?
Yeah, we should.
I remember you had a student who was doing an internship
Yeah.
from, I believe, Wisconsin, one summer who did some ant work in my yard.
Yes.
I was fascinated by that because I didn't realize that ants were being studied in that particular way. When you were here, you got to work with Don McCloud, who was everybody's favorite trail master, who people loved to go with him on his jaunts around the
Yes.
world. Was he an influence at all in your work?
Oh, tremendously. Tremendously.
Good. Talk about him a little bit.
I appreciate that Don, as a person, was very even-keeled. He was very passionate about the natural world, and he was a plant biologist, a plant ecologist. And he could come into a classroom and teach a lesson or lead an activity. And I, in retrospect, admired the fact that he was enthusiastic. He was going to do what he intended to do, whether the students were coming along with him or not. But for that characteristic, that enthusiasm that could not be quelled in any way, was very inspiring to many of us.
He was. Many people thought of him as being a hippie from the '60s because he had that kind of look, and he was that
Right.
kind of individualistic person. I know that he occasionally led treks out into the woods to show plants and things to elder hostel groups when they were
Right.
here, and they were all adored. They all adored
Yeah,
him
yeah.
because he was not only knowledgeable, but it was interesting, and he was fun, and he was down to earth, literally,
Yeah.
in his own way. Dr. Hutt told me that at some point that he had discovered that you were a pretty good student and you needed to get on to Georgia, where he had been. And I think he said he actually drove you down there to meet people in Athens.
No, that's not.
Is that not true?
No, that's not a true story. So.
Okay.
But one thing, before we leave, Don.
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, I'm doing the same. I'm occupying the same position in terms of the courses that I teach.
Okay.
That Don taught
Oh,
me in
really?
the past.
So you're the second Don now on the campus?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I do, because of that overlap in expertise and subject matter. In the library, periodically, I come across a book, and I open it up, and I see notes in the margin in his handwriting, and it always, gives me a thrill to see that.
He was a delight. He was a delight.
Yeah.
We all missed him when he left us. But when that was Dr. Hutt important to you that you got to join? Was he instrumental in your getting?
No, he was not. There is I can tell a story about
Okay.
getting to Georgia if you're interested.
Oh yeah.
So originally, when I came here as a freshman, Alan Smith served as my academic advisor. But then there were some financial difficulties at the college, and Alan was laid off. And my advisor became Frank Quick, who served me well in my junior and senior years. But in the spring of the junior to the fall of the senior year, Frank Quick and we started talking about the possibility of graduate school, and he knew of my interest in birds. So I was beginning to think about Cornell University, which was an important institution for bird study at that time and still is. But Frank mentioned that he said, I went to graduate school in Louisville with a man named Ken Abel, who I believe is at SUNY Albany in Albany, New York. And Frank picked up the telephone way before the days of the internet at the time, and picked up the telephone and called his old classmate, Ken Abel, and Dr. Abel said that, well, at this time I cannot take on any more graduate students. My lab is full, but I know of a colleague who was recently here who has just moved to Athens, Georgia. And that man's name is Ronald Pulliam. So actually Dr. Quick made the call to Ron Pulliam at Georgia, and but I understand he said, I've got a student named Scott who's interested. Are you accepting any students? And Pulliam said, well, yes, well, maybe. And that one thing led to another, and I went down to visit Pulliam, and that was in November of 1984. And it seemed like it was a good match for both of us. And I finished my degree here in December of '84 and started graduate school in March of '85.
Because that was very fast.
Yeah, they were on the University of Georgia's on the quarter system.
Yeah,
I started in the spring quarter, and Pulliam was looking for someone to do field work. He was a new faculty member there and had some ideas about starting some field biology projects involving birds, and so I think he thought that I would be okay to help him try out some things.
And you did.
I did, and I'm very grateful for how that worked out.
Great. Did you give any thought to changing institutions after you did your master's, maybe to go some other place?
I did, and my master's degree work was on it. It was in the field of animal behavior, or behavioral ecology. I studied the feeding behavior of wintering birds and how different species either collaborated with one another within a flock, or they were antagonistic between one another. So I was interested in behavior. Toward the end, well, there were two factors that kept me at University of Georgia. One was that through the master's degree work, which was essentially 1985 through 1987, toward the end of that, I began to get interested in this new perspective in biology, in ecology, called landscape ecology, that I described earlier. And that became really intriguing to me because I thought there were some very interesting scientific questions. And after all, I'd been studying these birds which move around in the landscape, which are very sensitive to these different habitats and their ability to access a place to sleep at night versus a place to go feed during the day. It turns out at the same time, my advisor, Ron Pulliam, was getting interested in the same topic. And so it was a transition for both of us. And I was switching from animal behavior at a very fine spatial scale to something interested in animals moving around at a broader spatial scale. And at the same time, he was becoming interested.
It was logical to continue then.
Right. I was in a place where I felt like I had a very good relationship and quite a bit of momentum in terms of my studies. And so that was one factor. The second factor, which is probably the more important one, is that my wife, Mitzi, was in the middle of her graduate studies whenever I finished.
Yeah.
And so she had a good another year and a half left on her studies. She's a school counselor and was doing her graduate studies in counseling at the time. So that was probably a just as important, if not more important, factor for keeping us in Athens, Georgia.
Right,
So,
and you met Mitzi here. You all were students here.
Yeah.
Did you marry right away after you left?
We married approximately a year after I left college. So she graduated in the spring of 1984, and I finished in December of 1984. We started dating in April of 1984. So we dated for about a month while she was still a student here. And then, then we were married in the December of 1985. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, backing up a little bit, how on the earth did you find, you were from Morganton?
Yes.
How did you find Mars Hill, and why did you decide to come here?
I grew up in the Baptist church, in the Southern Baptist church at the time, and I had a number of mentors in the church who had gone to Baptist colleges in North Carolina. So I was interested in that those folks created some interest in those institutions among me. I also looked at possibilities of Appalachian State and Western Carolina. I had been to Appalachian State a number of times as a public school student for various programs that they had going on there. So those, it came down, I became most interested in the three schools in the mountains, Appalachian State, Mars Hill, and Western Carolina. I was aware of the difference in the cost between a private school and a state school. So I remember the time that my father and I came to Mars Hill to visit the campus, and Frank Quick hosted us there. He did a very good job of playing host. I feel like he spent a couple hours with us during on that day. Got a good impression of the place. Then was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship. It was called the Church Leadership Scholarship at that time. And in effect, that scholarship brought down the cost of this institution so that it was competitive with the state schools. And that helped quite a bit.
Right. But Frank had given you a good feeling about
It did.
being here.
Yeah.
And so, as part of the church leadership, were you required to do any sort of service as a part of that scholarship, particularly?
I think the simple answer is no.
Okay.
That there was no requirement for service. However, the group of students who were on that scholarship program, we were the first class, or the first group in that scholarship program. We did quite a few things together that would qualify as service today. There may be I think there was the expectation that we take 2 courses. There were 2 courses specified. One of those was led by Robert Melvin, which in my first semester was very much an orientation to college. And Bob Melvin did such a good job of weaving in questions about ministry and belief, as well as being successful in college and that.
So he was very, very instrumental in helping you.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
You've stayed involved in your Baptist roots, because I know you, over the years, have periodically sung in the church choir at Mars Hill Baptist Church. Did you feel, and I'm going to ask you this question later, but did you feel that there was a religious component here that was a plus for you in your studies when you were a student? Did you feel that religion played, what kind of part did it play when you were on campus?
Okay, well, I came here because of the connection to the Baptist school. Right. And a second reason that I chose Mars Hill is that in my senior year in high school, I considered 2 different career choices, which may translate into majors at the college. One was church music, and the other was science. And that's part of the reason I chose Mars Hill, is because both of them were here, and they were faculty members at my high school in the music program who had a connection to the Mars Hill music program. So a number of things were coming together. Well, I have to confess that so I came to Mars Hill. The church music is one of my motivations, but I never took a music course.
Why did that happen?
Well, I think for some reason I don't know. I would call it providence, maybe.
You were being led to be a scientist.
Yes, and first semester I understood that I needed to take these courses in science and mathematics to maintain continuity with my high school studies, and I fell into that, and very quickly I just knew where I needed to be.
Let me talk to you about something else that's happened for you over the years. You have written an incredible number of articles, or been a part of articles by several people, authors. Did you feel any sense of publish or perish, or were you doing this because you really wanted to keep working in your field and let others know what you were working on? Sometimes in an academic institution, professors feel that if they don't produce books or articles, they're not going to get promoted or they're not going to be looked at seriously. Did you ever feel any of that?
Well, that expectation and therefore obligation to publish is certainly true at many research institutions, that's my graduate studies and then my postdoctoral work was very much training me to work at a research institution, whether that be academic or government agency. So I was really in the mode of doing science in that way, and I think to be an active scholar, that's what one needs to do. It's just to continue to be active in the field, and then to demonstrate that activity through producing products, whether by communicating results, whether it's in an oral or a written form. So I came here with, and I was joking a little bit earlier when I say I'm waiting to see how it would work out, but that was true with the first 2 or 3 years I was here, not knowing where my career was going to go next. And in order to be a viable applicant at any other kind of job, I needed to keep that up. So there was that that expectation that I came with, and maybe it's an expectation of myself. I felt like I need to do this in order to remain active as a scientist. But once I got here, I found that Marcia was a place where there was there was very little pressure coming from my department or from the institution to publish.
Were you surprised?
No, not really, because I had heard stories from colleagues from different parts at different institutions across the country that are smaller institutions, and some of them are under the pressure and the expectation to publish and remain active. Others not at all. I found that Marcia was a place that didn't exert pressure on me to remain active as a scientist, but it was a place where I could do that. And I was fortunate to have support within the academic programs, that is Frank Quick, who was the department chair at that time, and Earl Langer, who was essentially the provost or academic dean at the time, that they more than tolerated my desire to do scholarship. They supported it.
Right.
Even if they weren't able to support it in financial ways, they gave encouragement and moral support. So to finish this, there was a bit of a evolution, if I can use the biological term, in those first few years, in that I realized that yes, it's satisfying for me to remain active as a scientist. It keeps me connected with colleagues outside the institution that are active in my field. And it also provides opportunities for the students here to get involved with research. I think one of the disadvantages of a small liberal arts college for science students is that if we don't have graduate programs in the sciences, our students do not have the opportunity to interact with graduate students on a regular basis. And they don't have the same understanding of graduate studies that a student at a larger institution could get.
Right.
But by providing opportunities for students to get involved in my projects, and by bringing graduate students from other institutions to campus, I was able to provide a learning opportunity for Marcia students that they might not otherwise have. So my motivations for doing the extra work of doing research, and then all the work that goes into the writing and publishing, sort of transition from initially some sort of sense of obligation or something I needed to do, a sense of duty, to something that I wanted to do, and I saw the benefits that I personally gained and my students gained from.
The huge advantage, it seemed to me, would be for the students, because they would not get that if you were not involved. Also, it's great for the institution to know that there are faculty people here who are actively involved in cross-pollinating with other universities and schools and research. Do you feel, now that the college has gone to university status, that there needs to be more focus on the published parish kind of thing? What do you think? Is the school too small for that?
I think I may want to recast your question or my answer. I think that the institution would greatly benefit itself by providing more support for faculty who have the desire to remain active scholars.
Is that a soapbox you can get on?
Well, it is the typical trajectory of watching young faculty come. A young faculty member that's fresh out of graduate school, they have been trained to be a scholar in their field. If they hold a PhD, for example, if they hold that kind of degree. They come here and, of course, the big challenge is we have heavy teaching loads. So the first few years, as the new faculty member begins to work through his or her courses, that's just tremendous amount of work. To do that well, teaching is a tremendous amount of work. So what often happens is that a new faculty member is investing all this time and effort into doing well in their teaching. They may carry some, they may have some projects, some research projects from their previous institution or previous life that they bring here and they finish off while they're here. But the typical thing is that a new faculty member is productive in their research for 2-3 years afterward, and then it quickly dies away.
Wow.
And I think it is due to the demands of a teaching job. I think that it is a part that there's very little expectation in the ethos of the campus for remaining an active scholar. And honestly, in the sciences, the institution does not provide the resources that a faculty member needs. The time and the financial resources that are needed. It's part of the reason I'm being able to do the science that I do is it's relatively inexpensive. I mean, I can take my
grants along the way. Too.
Yeah, I've gotten grants that, but I can go into the woods with my clipboard and my camera and some very simple measuring devices and collect data which is relevant. Yeah. And then with a computer to do the analysis, and the cost is relatively low. But some of my other colleagues who study cell biology or genetics, just the cost of doing that research and materials is very high. The Marcio as an institution does not provide startup funds. A new faculty member that goes into a job in which they're expected to remain an active scholar can typically expect $75,000 to $100,000 in startup funds to get their lab running. Yeah. And this is not this institution can't do that.
Does the administration know? Are they aware of this? The thing that you were talking about, are they aware of it enough to be planning for how they're going to handle it as the college university now grows? Are they aware of this?
Well, I think they may be aware, but I don't think that there's no commitment to.
Why not?
Just because I think because of the focus of this institution is generating learning opportunities for students. That office is the currency for that is credit hours, providing courses. And I think that there may be a intellectual understanding that we're not a place that can provide the resources that are needed for studies in sciences. I'm not saying this very well, but I think there's knowledge about that, but it's not a priority. Right. There are so many other places to invest resources across campus to receive a greater, a more immediate benefit. Now, the tension that is in the last strategic plan, or the one that we're under right now, one of the stated goals was to increase opportunities for undergraduate research. That has not been achieved. And actually in the sciences, we are able to do less now than we could 4 years ago. And it's largely comes down to financial resources.
It's always money, isn't it?
Yeah.
Always money. How important to you was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring?
It continues to be an influential book, and it's as much about the story of Rachel Carson as it is her book. I don't want to give a biography of her, but she was, in short, she was a government scientist who saw an issue through her work. She saw some environmental problems developing, and she was astute enough to know that working within the confines of her government job, she would not get very far in solving these problems. But she had the gift of writing and was able to produce this very influential book.
And I'm aware still people talk about it, so that's important. I noticed I'm not sure that people on campus know that you travel all over everywhere in the United States and often give speeches, lectures to meetings and so forth. I remember noticing that one of your discussions was, I forget where it took place, I think out west somewhere, where you talked about the ecology or the ecological results of the devastating fires that took place in Yellowstone National Park.
Right.
I remember when we all saw those horrible pictures of that place being burned, there was great concern that this was going to be for future generations a horrific time. And then suddenly there was a discovery that indeed nature was, and was that what you were talking about? That nature was going to bring it back in a different, very important way.
Well, so we're talking about, of course, the fires that occurred in approximately 1988 in Yellowstone National Park, in that vicinity of the Northern Rockies. Well, that is a system that that scale of fire is natural in a sense. This is a system in which forest fires occur practically every year. They're natural. They're often started by lightning storms that are when a thunderstorm comes along, lightning strikes hit the ground, but there's no rain. And so that creates a fire. Often those fires burn over a relatively small area, 10, 20 acres or so, and then they burn out quite naturally. But then some scientists who have studied, have gathered information on the long-term dynamics, came to the conclusion that those fires of the scale that occurred in 1988, burning 750,000 acres, that those occur approximately every 300 to 400 years. And so from that landscape perspective, those fires were not out of character. It's just surprising to us as human beings with our limited lifespans.
Nature taking care of itself and regenerating and starting
right.
again.
So, and then of course there's one of the things that set the stage was Smokey Bear actually contributed to those fires.
How you mean?
Well, in the dynamic that I described earlier, where these lightning-caused fires, there are numerous. They're every year there's quite a number of them, but they burn only a small area. Well, when these small fires come along, they burn up the fuel in the forest. And so the next year, if there's a fire that comes along, well, it can't burn it all. There's no fuel on the ground. There's no sticks and leaves and pine needles and things for it to burn. Well, in the 1940s, so after World War II, many people in the United States decided that fire was bad, that it was dangerous, it was destructive. And so the ethic of Smokey Bear said that whenever there's a fire, go in immediately and put it out. Don't let it burn. Don't let it spread. And the consequence of that was that over time, the fuels built up in the forest. So that when there was an especially dry summer, such as 1988, when it's hot and dry and windy and there's some source of ignition, the fires start up and they become much bigger than one would expect.
So most people don't know that Smokey the Bear might not have been a totally positive thing.
Right. Well, the ethic of Smokey the Bear
Yes.
is widely perceived in forest management and ecology and conservation biology as being a bad thing right now.
Interesting.
So when I went there, when I went to Oak Ridge National Lab, the scientists I went to study with were some of the leaders in this new field of landscape ecology. And they saw those fires as an opportunity, because as those fires burned across the landscape, they created a patchy landscape. Forests that were burned right next to forests that were not burned.
Right.
And it's like a grand experiment, a grand manipulation. Of course, nature did the manipulation. So then that created the opportunity for going to the park and studying the plant and animal responses to these new patterns of burned versus unburned forests that had been created.
What happened in situations where you have these massive burns? Because you're burning up ant colonies and these kinds of things that are used to plant new seeds.
Yeah.
Was there then, does nature take care of that in some way?
Yes. Well, any given, and we're getting pretty deep into fire ecology here, but most forest fires tend to burn along the surface of the ground and burn up the leaves, the pine needles, the litter that's on the ground, and any twigs and things which are on the ground. But the soil itself underneath is usually not severely damaged. And even though trees are killed, there's still seeds in the soil. And within space, even if it's an extremely hot fire, the dramatic scenes that we see on the TV, for example, where it seems that everything in that hot fire is being consumed, in reality, there's hot spots and cool spots right next door. So you may have one area that's the size of this room or several rooms in which the fire is very hot. And sure enough, the topsoil is burned and practically sterilized. But a short distance away is a place that was not as hot. There's still seeds around for plants to come back. There are maybe not all the trees were killed. There's still some individuals that are alive that can release their seeds. There are animals that survived the fire by being in the burrows underground, or they just walked or ran away or flew away to an area outside the burn, and they're going to be back soon.
So this is a whole fascinating everything is new about it after a fire has taken over.
Yeah. Well, there's a combination of some places which are a clean slate, so to speak, but then places right next door, which, they were blackened ground for a little bit, but there's plenty of living things there.
I want to go to a different area. One of the night when you were here as a student in the early '80s, you worked in this building. We're in the Wall Science Building, the old Wall Science Building. You worked upstairs, and in the first decade of the new century, we got lucky to have the new Ferguson Science Building on campus. And that is indeed that's in your bailiwick. You're a manager of that building pretty much, aren't you? To oversee what goes on in that building?
I'm principally a contact for, I'm a person who's supposed to be aware of if the building is functioning properly, if there's a problem, I serve as a liaison between the people who use the building and facilities. So it's more liaison than managing.
Okay. When I talked to, Christy and I did an interview with Dr. Hutt and Dr. Quick. We were talking about the building because it had not, I don't think it had been, maybe it was about being finished at that time. And they said that they had indeed been asked to provide the sort of information that would be necessary for an architect to do the building. Yet I remember talking to you shortly after the building first opened, and I sensed that you were not totally happy with some of the things that actually evolved. How do you feel about the building? Tell the truth.
The building it's a great asset, and there's two parts that I'll say for the clarity of your audience here. The Ferguson portion of the building is a new wing. That new wing includes most of the rooms are laboratories. Because scientific laboratories require a great deal of plumbing and electrical and ventilation, and at many cases, it's more practical to build new than to retrofit something that is old.
Right.
So it only made sense with the new wing to make most of those rooms laboratory facilities. So the new wing was built, and then it's connected, directly connected to the Wall Science Building where we are sitting now. And many of the spaces in Wall Science Building were converted into classroom space. There's still some laboratories in Wall Science, but largely more general use classroom facilities. Now, this the Wall Science Building has a steel skeleton to it. And so very few of the rooms that are currently in Wall Science Building have the same footprint as the rooms before the renovation. During the renovation, it was possible to stand on one end of the building and see all the way through the building because all the interior walls had been removed. So there's two things. One is there's these new laboratory facilities in the Ferguson wing, and then the renovation of the Wall Science Building. So I am ecstatic over both of them. Good. Because we essentially, before the construction, before the building, the Wall Science Building, where all the natural sciences were working, it was a 1940s era layout.
Right.
And while there had been some attempts to modernize periodically over the years, that was just very piecemeal, a room here, a room there. It was not up to standards. We had limited space. We had to rotate among the different classes, even different subject areas were using the same rooms. We were cramped. So it limited us with respect to our teaching. It limited us with respect to our recruiting, because a potential student would come to Mars Hill interested in the sciences, look around and see the rather decrepit facility that we had here, and many of those students frankly went elsewhere. So the renovations have provided us with more modern facilities, have given us the room that we've needed to do things well, have helped us in recruiting, and so just as a side note, the enrollment of the institution has increased by roughly 32% over the past 4 to 5 years. In the number of students majoring in the sciences has increased by 40%.
Gracious. And do you attribute it directly to the facilities?
Well, it's the facilities helped. They didn't hurt us at all, and they made us competitive with some of our sister institutions, right. And they put a good face on what we do, and right. that helps.
Are they adequate for the programs now?
Yes.
The labs, I'm thinking.
Yes.
Okay, good. I heard one statement the other day, and I was wondering how you thought about this. A statement was made that in the old labs in the Wall Science Building, there was a lot more sense of camaraderie and more casualness than there is in the new building, because everything's locked up now in the new building. You don't get in and out of labs as easily as you used to in the old building. Is that true?
I don't know. I would not agree with that,
okay.
that characterization.
Okay.
I think that we are, because the materials that are associated with both the teaching and research in science, because they are potentially dangerous, there are safety concerns that we need to secure. And there are also valuable items right. that, honestly, we need to be good stewards of our resources and keep those things safe, things that could be easily picked up by either a student or even a person walking through the building.
Is there something that you need in the Wall Science, not Wall, but in Ferguson, that you don't have? Is there something that's on your wish list, your bucket list over there? What do you need that you don't have?
I think there's a number of relatively small things there in terms of the equipment that we have in our laboratories. One of the I mentioned the growth of students in the sciences. So we have some bigger classes now, and we have more sections of courses going on at the same time. And so that sometimes puts a strain on some equipment. For example, if you think about an electronic balance, that tool that scientists use to weigh things. 6 years ago, we had an adequate number of those to serve the students that we had and the number of sections of courses. Now we have more, and we run short on those. And one of my colleagues, Matt Milnes, uses devices that measure, say, heart rate, blood pressure, electrical activity, either in living things such as frogs and rats, or even human beings. He really could use, he's got 2 or 3 of those now, he could use a dozen of those. And again, the interest is in providing hands-on learning opportunities for our students. I mean, it's one thing to have 2 or 3 students working in a group versus having 6 or 7 students who need to share the same equipment.
Do you have any sort of links to the corporate world where there are big pharmaceutical companies, for example, and other kinds of things in industry that caters to or provides equipment for medical facilities and labs, where you can go and say, I need this, can you provide it as a gift to the college? Do you have that sort of thing?
No, I don't. The college has benefited over the years from some of the companies that are in North Carolina in the Research Triangle. I'm thinking of some of the pharmaceutical manufacturing companies who periodically would decide to refit some of their laboratories. They would have surplus equipment or salvage equipment that was still functional. And 15 years ago or so, we acquired a number of things secondhand.
But they were still helpful, weren't they?
Yeah, it was still functional, and matter of fact, I use a couple pieces of equipment, real simple. One's called a drying oven. I collect soil samples and put it in it to dry it. It came from the United States Forest Service. Right. It was surplus or salvage equipment. One of the things that I admire is both a blessing and a curse. For the faculty and staff at Mars Hill are often very good at thinking of creative ways to deliver our programs, so we can acquire resources here and do useful things and use those resources in a very productive way around us. On the other hand, our ability to get by often gets in the way of arguing for resources which are needed to keep our programs modern and up to date.
One of the things I was going to mention to you along this, I have a very, very good friend who has your job at Oklahoma Baptist University. He's no longer with us, but at the time he became a senior faculty, he'd been there quite a long time, he had sent out enough graduate students in his program he would just simply call up people who become well-known doctors or well-known people, and I need a whatever, and he would simply name it. And these people, these things he wanted just magically appeared because he had established the longevity. And these companies and corporations often were delighted because it was a way they could use a tax write-off. And it was, as you say, equipment that they were no longer using, or secondary equipment, maybe whatever. So that may be a way to go at some point in the future if you've got time to do it. That means courting.
Well, that's a key thing to say, time to do it.
Time to do it.
Right.
And it's difficult to find that time. Let's talk about Scott the person, outside of Scott the teacher and whatever. I know that you are into all sorts of things. People tell me that the honey from your bees is about the best there is. How did you get into working with bees, and where did all that come from?
It probably goes back to, as a child, my grandfather who lived close to my parents had bees, and they were interesting, but the only thing I can recall that he ever did with them is to take the honey from the bees, rob the honey from the bees, so to speak, and catch a swarm occasionally, but he basically just left them there. And then in the early 2000s, I got interested in it and made a few contacts and got some bees, and I have enjoyed working with them. So my wife and I, we enjoy the honey for our own use, and if we have any extra, we share some and gift some and sell some to members of the community.
And you are also involved in Madison County Beekeepers.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't think anybody knows you do this. You're keeping it very, very quiet. Somebody told me the other day, this may be a rumor, that you are thinking about becoming a sheep farmer?
Well, I am thinking of getting some either sheep or goats to put on a piece of pasture land that my wife and I acquired.
Great.
That's next to our home. And,
wonderful.
That's still developing.
Is that going to require a lot of extra time for you because of taking care of animals? How is that going to impact your life?
I can only speak theoretically at this point. It's something that I think I can manage. And it's an endeavor, should it all come to fruition, that I think it will never be a large money-making enterprise. If it can pay for itself, I will be delighted. But it's just something different. I think you mentioned the Beekeepers Association, and I enjoy being involved with it's an endeavor outside of the world of Mars Hill College and University. It's outside the world of academics. Mars Hill Baptist, that we both attend, it's a church community there, but still there's a big influence of the college and university community there. But when I go to the county beekeepers meeting, there's a cross-section of society at those meetings that they're people I do not normally come in contact with, and it ranges from the young hippie types, organic farmers, back to landers that live, so many of them live in Madison County, to the retired farmer who has been here several generations, and it's a nice, diverse, eclectic collection of community of people, and becoming interested in bigger livestock. Not I've always thought of bees as livestock, but fuzzy livestock.
Right.
I've gone to a number of meetings with cooperative extension and workshops, and again, I enjoy that the diversity of people I meet there.
That's great. If I'm a parent and I'm bringing my child here to look at Mars Hill University as a place to come to school, how are you going to sell me that this is the place you want my child to be?
Well, I think that we can make the standard arguments that small institution, our class sizes are relatively small. The students have much more opportunity to interact with the faculty that they would not have at a larger institution. There's those kinds of things. But I would say that the value is in the people, that I think the people who come here and stay here to work have a calling or a passion for working with young people and helping them learn and grow. I think this place is very good at creating an environment in which young people can thrive. Our student body is diverse with respect to, we can think socioeconomic, ethnic backgrounds, but also they're diverse in their levels of ability. So we have some of the best students that one could ever ask for. Those students come here and they find opportunities to, again, get involved with faculty, to thrive, and to take whatever the next step there's going to be in their life. At the same time, we have students who come here. We have a lot of just average college students and some which are probably less prepared, capable, but less prepared. But we are a place where those students, they too can find a place to thrive and grow and be challenged and nurtured at the same time.
So you feel, because you went through all this yourself.
Right.
You essentially had Frank Quick doing this to you at some point along the way, and Don and others doing this for you. You're an ecologist, and you look at the world in a probably very different world in a way that we do. What do you think is the Western North Carolina's biggest ecological worry right now?
The increasing human population. This is an area that's very attractive. Physically, it's beautiful, and it is growing. And so while there are ways for people to coexist and with natural things and to have a quality of life while letting nature itself thrive, it's a challenge. Unless we do that in a mindful way, we're going to lose some things. So this area has an interesting history with respect to people living with the land and on the land. One of the things that's interesting is that there's actually more forest across western North Carolina now than there was in 1900.
Is it because the government's taking forest land?
No, it's because, and most of that gain is on private land. In 1900, a lot of the people who were here were farming. They were growing food to feed their families and some to grow at the market. A lot of the food was that people were consuming locally was being produced locally. Then a whole series of things happened, and part of it was that the farmland began to grow out. People were farming on steep hill slopes, and erosion began to kick in. For a number of physical and economic reasons, farming collapsed in this area. And then there was World War II, and after World War II, a lot of people started leaving the area. So really this trend started happening 1925 to about 1950 or 60. The human population in most mountain counties was actually declining. People were living, and of course they were going to the industrial centers that were developing all around the Piedmont of North Carolina to the factories of Ohio and Alabama, all around. People were realizing there are better ways to make a living than trying to farm this rough, rocky landscape. So with the abandonment of that farmland, many of those farms started growing back into forest. And that trend continues even today, but now it's more heterogeneous, because as people started moving back here in the mid-1980s and that increased through the 1990s and the early 2000s, then some of those forests that were growing back were then converted into residential areas, particularly close to Asheville, Hendersonville, and along the major interstate corridors. So now it's an area in which forest is being lost for human development in some places, but it's still growing back in other places. But on average, there's more forest now, and because there's more forest, we have turkeys in the area, we have more black bears, deer is increasing, and another of forest's creatures, everything from salamanders to songbirds to wildflowers, are actually increasing in many places. The landscape, nature is probably better off now than it was at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s.
Do you worry that here in Mars Hill, for example, this is the first year I've had deer in my yard, and the first year I've had wild turkeys in my yard.
Yeah.
And I guess this is an encroaching kind of thing as we go with their search for food or their being comfort. Do you see this? Do you see this as a result of any particular thing, or is it just a normal progression for these animals to be coming in closer to us? Is it a search for food?
It's actually I think first of all, this phenomenon is widespread in the U.S. The population of deer and turkeys have been growing very rapidly, and particularly within the town, the hunting pressure is low. I mean, there's really practically no hunting right around town, and these animals are smart enough to well, at least if they aren't being actively threatened by human beings, they're perfectly happy to walk into your yard and eat your nice, expensive shrubbery. So.
They do. If you had to think in terms of what you're going to leave when your time at Mars Hill University, what would you like for people to remember you for here? What would you like for them to remember when your name comes up with regard to the university? What would you like for them to remember?
Well, I don't honestly, I don't think in terms of legacy. I hope, my hope is that when I leave the place, that it will be better off, that I will have contributed to maintaining some of the values that the institution holds, that we've discussed throughout this interview, and that in my sphere of influence, that is in the science and math, that those programs will be stronger than whenever I came, and stronger in the sense of thriving, serving students well, and also that it's just a good place to work. That it's a place where faculty can come and find a place to invest themselves and make a reasonable living and contribute to the greater good.
I can tell you're happy here. I think can feel that you're happy.
Well, as much as I can express it. So.
Good. Thank you, Scott.
So,
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay.